Welcome, everyone, to the C-Suite Sales and Marketing Perspectives podcast. I'm Steve McDonald, your host. And today we've got a very special guest and somebody that has, I think, a very unique background to talk about the hidden powers of today's B2B CMO. We have on Signe Valeur. And Signe, you were not only a two-time B2B CMO, you're a former chief commercial officer. You're a chief executive officer of a company that got sold, and then you became the chief marketing officer of the new company. You've got a background in B2B and B2C, and I love that because there's so many expectations, right, that are coming over from B2C into B2B these days that we just can't ignore that. So I would love to ask, you've got a strong leadership background. You've got a commercial background. You talk a lot about the importance of showing up and showing up right. I'd love to just, if you wouldn't mind, expanding on your background here a little bit before we dive in and start talking about the hidden powers of the CMO.
Yeah, and thank you for inviting me. I'm super excited. Some really nice topics I think we're going to cover today. But yeah, normally when people ask me about being a CMO, I actually often see myself as much more, or like it's just a title. But if you look at my background, I have also worked, my career started in digital sales, then I moved into marketing, then I moved into, running a whole telco company as a CEO, and then as a commercial director, also having support and sales. And so I think I've had this broad responsibility, and that definitely also has an impact on how I am working as a CMO, and is also probably what you will hear today when we talk about different things. It's how I work as a CMO. So of course, I don't know with people coming more from the marketing background, but I just remember back in the days when I started in digital sales, marketing was the ones making campaigns for TVC, but they didn't care about if it was actually delivering any numbers. It was more about brand recognition, awareness, and these kind of things, where I have always come from, you need to deliver something. You have numbers to achieve revenue, inbound leads, whatever it is. But that has definitely been the red thread in my career. So normally I actually say that I'm probably more of a growth um, officer, if I should use some of the new more buzzwords, than actually just a marketing officer.
I want to dive right in. And one of the very first things when we talked about the evolving role of the CMO, because it's easy for CMOs to be seen as, well, you're one of the biggest cost centers in the business, right? You're supposed to generate leads, right? Do that and do that well, then we'll talk about anything else you can do. But you talked about that most B2B companies have a big gap, and you called it the customer intimacy gap, and why we must relearn our methods for customer understanding, deep, meaningful customer understanding. And so I just wanted to open up with that because I thought it was a great place to start.
Yeah, definitely. I think the biggest difference between coming from B2C and B2B is that you, as a B2C company, sell directly, often through an e-commerce platform or a shop. So marketing's role in that case, and especially with the background I have had in marketing, has been, okay, we need to deliver right away impact. And to do so, you learn very quickly that you need to understand the customers. You need to understand what they care about, and because otherwise you will not be able to communicate something that will make them convert and buy the product. So you also very easily see if they don't like your product, you will get bad reviews, or so that kind of immediately response makes you being very customer centric. And the difference I've seen in the more B2B world, and also when I talk with people about from my B2B marketing roles, is that your role there is to deliver leads to a salesperson who then, of course, needs to convert that into a customer. But that also means that the person they often talk with is a maybe CFO or CEO, but the decision maker. But it doesn't always reflect the end customer, or you can say the user who is maybe the super user. So you very easily change your communication and everything you do towards that decision maker. Also product-wise, right? Can I build features that the sales team that makes it easier for the sales team to close that deal for the CEO, the CFO? And there is where there you need to be aware of, where I can see, oh, this is a little bit dangerous road to go down, is that you easily can start building something that is for the wrong end, the wrong customer. You're not actually, we say, delivering what the customer actually needs. And then you don't see that, because where in the B2C world, you would see immediately churn if you have, oh, this product is not really living up to my expectations, and now customer or the users are complaining. It will probably be 12 months later when you have to renew the contract that you actually see the consequences of that. And then it's too late, because now the competitor actually built something that the customers, the end users were complaining to the CEO or whoever it is, like, we don't have this feature and it's not making our life easier. And then boom. I think that using the B2C approach can actually be a really good influence, because you can keep, hey guys, we just need to remember that yes, it's the CFO who takes the decisions, or the CEO, and we of course need to help the sales team to close deals. But we should never ever forget who also needs to be happy with the product, the customers using the product, the app in our case. In family, of course, it's the early the educators, the parents, that if they are not happy, luckily you can say we get quite easily reviews actually there as well. So we can also see, okay, if we're not delivering what they were asking for, we see it in the reviews and can act on it. But otherwise, yeah. So that's a good, I think it's a good, for me, it's been helpful, because I think that customer-centric approach is very valuable.
Here's what's really interesting. Inside of B2C organizations, there's very often a C-suite role to represent the customer, like a chief customer officer. And you're seeing more and more chief experience officer, right? Which is all the experience that the customer is going through. You don't see that almost ever in a B2B environment. Yet the voice of the customer is the highest authority in our business, right? There is no higher authority than the customer. Yet who in a B2B organization has responsibility for representing the customer and aligning the different departments and the company around it? Sales isn't going to do that. They have a very different mantra.
Completely. And yeah, they often don't have the mandate. No, but it's true, because I actually talked with my colleague, and she were actually able to represent something from the customer success team that they apparently had been fighting for a while. But for some reason, they were not either able to communicate it in a way so it made sense, like, in the business, or maybe, I don't know if they were even sitting in that table, around that table, where that had to be brought up. But then my colleague did it, and immediately it was put on roadmap. So even though you have people talking with the customers, it's also about how do you then translate that. And that's where I think if you have a CXO level person representing the customers, of course you have one, ambassador for the customers. But to your point, normally you don't see that in a leadership team in the B2B world. So therefore, yeah, who is then? I think every company, B2C companies as well, are of course revenue driven. You will focus on where you know that business comes in, and that's often the sales team. And to your point, the sales team, which they should not, their focus is how to close deals. So it will again be with the focus on the decision maker, and that will always then be what you will talk about. Okay, how do we close deals? How do we get those features that makes the CFO happy? So yeah, it's a tough one.
I love how you brought up customer success in this too, because it's all about the mandates that these departments have. Sales, their mandates are to close prospects, right? So the customer success, look at some of the key KPIs. It's to avoid churn, it's to cross-sell, it's to upsell. They are a sales organization to our existing customer base, right? So they're very focused on what we do and what we have to offer. Who in the company takes a step back and says, how do we really get to know these companies? Most companies, they talk, and their go-to-market strategy is always to come at it from swimming in our own lane, right? Where we're talking about what we do and how what we do helps you. But we don't ever really stand back and say, what is it that you need help with? What are your greater challenges? really learn how they articulate those, right? And then adapt to how we sell into that. And so it's my point of view, and I wanted to ask this of you, is I don't think there's anybody better in a B2B company than the CMO to represent the needs of the customer.
No, I agree. Of course, I would say it's the CMO with the right marketing department, right? Because when I was reflecting on it and how I organize myself, I think and how I influence to have more customer focus, it's also to make sure, for example, to explain why I need a person from the German market who understands our sector in depth, because of course I can't represent that, but explaining to the leadership team, I need that. I need someone who can come with that knowledge. And then say that person, by the way, needs to have a mandate. So when you have a product roadmap discussion, I need that person to be on those meetings. Or so that's the influence. That's where the customer focus comes in. It's not only sitting and saying, "Hey, did you remember that this perspective?" But it's really also giving the people that are sitting in the organization the right mandate, because or spot who is important here to have the customer focus, because I think it's sitting actually, of course you have people who understands the customers in the organization, but it's also helping pointing out, okay, now we need that insight, or we need that person to we just need to listen and give them some kind of mandate or decision power.
Now, what's interesting is kind of you talked about from two different perspectives, the customer perspective, but then in our last conversation, you very much talked about a category leadership mindset that
Mhm.
the company needs to have. And then I'd love to understand a little bit more about what that is, and then the
Mhm.
role of the new modern CMO in that mindset.
Mhm. Yeah, and I think the reason why we talked about it is now it's just, first I worked for Luna, which is a fintech bank trying to disrupt the whole Nordic bank industry. And that was not to copy paste what is out there. It was to be something completely different. So that was the first time I really experienced the power of being like the category leader. And now in family, it's a little bit, I think, the same thing. I'm trying to really make sure we keep daring to be, you can say, taking the position, because it's not easy. The easiest is to look at the competitors, say, oh, who are we losing deals to? Let's try to copy paste their features and then just do it a little bit better. But the problem with that is then, it will always be this feature competition. And that is where it also becomes a problem if you have a sales driven motion, because often what happens is that then you have the sales team saying, "Oh, we just need this feature," and you act on it, and suddenly you have like 1,000 features, and it's like, what are we actually building here? Instead of, and I think that's where a marketing or the role of a CMO, because what you help with is actually also to, because that you need to communicate in a very easy way, so you understand why should you choose family over a competitor. And it's not for me to list just features, because you'll be like, wow. It's to explain it in a way so oh, this is my problems, and I can hear you solving them for me. And I believe that kind of, that's how, and therefore you have to find that narrative, first of all, that convince you to that. And I also have to do it in a way where you really feel, okay, this is something worth trying, because especially when it's software, it's like, it's not just buying it as a B2C. That's where we have an advantage in the B2C. Well, it's easy. But if you actually decide to change software, it's a huge decision. So you need to have an immediate feeling that this is better than the rest. And I've just seen that if you actually are able to, first of all, find out what am I actually, not just looking at what's out there, but what am I trying to solve? What do I want to be for somebody? And then just own that, you can say, category, and communicate it and build towards that, instead of the other comparison game. It's if you nail it, and it's the most difficult one to nail, just to be very, like, it's not easy. So that's why you often end up being on the more feature gap kind of competition, or competing with competitors around that. But if you nail it, it's also very difficult for competitors to to take the space. But it is very much about storytelling. It's very much branding and all the beauty of marketing. That is really, supporting a category position. Yeah. I think it's so, yeah, I love going to that direction because I just know it works.
I can't tell you how many countless SaaS CEOs, CMOs, CROs that have been on this podcast. And I'm a two-time SaaS founder myself. So I understand falling in love with your product, right? And I love wanting to talk about all the great features and components. And as soon as they understand, as soon as they get that we can do this and this and this, and right. But the truth of the matter is ChatGPT is writing code these days, right? Winning the race through product feature benefit on a technology is no longer where it's going to be. And, tying back into the importance of the voice of the customer, McKinsey had a report that came out that said only 15% of companies actually execute well on a voice of customer strategy. Yet it's the greatest source of ideation and innovation, right? And when you talk about storytelling, it's not about the individual feature components. You have to get interested first. You have to build up trust, and you have to have a vision that they buy into to tell that story. And then they're going to have the interest to want to know more and dig deeper and understand all the things, because our platforms are important, right? I mean, the technology, the feature sets, they are important, but we switch the order that they come in, right? And we want to lead with a feature benefit story, right? And it's just not the way that it works.
And to your point with the whole AI, I think, it's here, right? And it's just moving so fast. And I think what you also talk a little bit about, also trust in a brand, trust that. And I think especially when with AI, we also know it's all about data, and I think it's almost part of how it is. You share all the data, you share all so you need to have some kind of trust that the company you're choosing is also a company that you can trust. And I think, especially, of course, in our space where it's with children and parents, there's no doubt that even if there was a competitor coming out of the blue, building maybe a better product because now they could just build it from scratch, it's always easier to just build something new. I can guarantee you that you would not, as a daycare, just choose that because now that you could do something smarter. Because if I don't know if is that a Chinese company just stealing all my data and I'm not aware of it. So there's definitely, and I think that would be even more important, not only in our sector but also other sectors. That trust thing that is also not rational, right? And it takes years to build. So it's not that easy to compete on either. So I think that, for example, we have a podcast that we didn't, it was, we do it because we genuinely care about the whole sector and we want to be a little bit the ambassadors for the people who are not being always treated as well. And, we want to give more respect back to the sector. But now I can definitely see how that is definitely a plus that we have that and that we have positioned ourselves as that. You can't compete with that. And that, so even though we maybe will have some features we need to work on, hopefully with to help the customers, I think that they would be okay waiting, even if a competitor came from the outside, because they now trust us and they know that we are here for them as well. So there's the value of that is just so huge that it cannot be. Yeah, you shouldn't forget that.
In November, Forrester came out with their predictions for this year, and they said that trust is the currency that gets us into the deal and keeps the deal, right?
Yeah.
And there's all kinds of stats. Like Sixth Sense had a big study that came out that when a business gets into like day one, when they decide, okay, I need this kind of a technology or SaaS platform, right? Day one of their buying journey, they put 4 out of 5 vendors that they're going to review on the list. And 95% of the time, they pick from one of those. So if you're not known and trusted on day one, you're
Yeah.
not in the list. You're out of the game. Right.
And that's here where marketing is so sometimes undervalued or maybe not or misunderstood because people say, oh, it's just colors or but there's so much that have a rational way of buying stuff, but there's also the emotional or irrational that you can't really you meet someone and you're like, I don't know, it just seemed like a good guy. You don't know, right? It's just something that and the same goes for a company. Like I feel like they look trustworthy. And the reason why you can't put because there's so much behind that. The font, the colors, there's so much psychology put into it that it's not just colors. People working with marketing, there's so much put into it, and that's where But to the first, what we start with from a customer perspective, because that's the only way you would know if you really understand. Okay, what is important for you, and then you can start from there. And that is why different companies are not always purple, right? Sometimes you trust something that is more serious. Okay, then it's maybe more on a blue, or but it's just not that. It's just and that's sometimes undervalued.
It's almost like a lot of boards or CEOs, when they hear that the CMO wants to work on the brand, they think it's going to be the color palette and new design features. It's relevancy. If you think about what a brand is, we all learned it years ago in school or early in our careers. It's a trust mark, right? It's not a color palette. It represents an experience that the customer can trust, right? We've lost sight, I think, even of what the word brand means. And then you throw in trust and it gets lumped in with all those generic words like value and things like that, right? But trust is a foundational element of how we build, sell, and keep customers in our business. And, Forrester went on to say, hey, we've got brand plans, we've got demand gen plans. We don't have trust development plans. And their recommendation to CMOs is that that's the number one thing that you can do is develop trust, because that's the fulcrum, the foundation, however you want to call it. And it's getting more and more important because like, and we talked about this before. I'd love to get your thought on this in an AI era, right? Where it's easier to create content than it has ever been before, and good content too, right? That the brand differentiation and the way that we can personalize our content based on our deep understanding of our customer isn't something that AI can just whip out. How do you see everything we've been talking about, deep understanding of the customer, the need for trust, the AI era? How is this coming together as the modern CMO needs to think about this?
Yeah, it comes down to what we said in the beginning. For example, when I say that I need to hire someone who comes from the sector who understands it, it's because I can use AI to, optimize, do it more scalable, but I need that person to come with the input, because even though, AI, of course, it also gets clever and more clever. But one thing is what data says. Another thing is talking with them and hearing what's going on, and also be able to, I don't know, it's that where it's not just always data, but it's also really understand it in depth, and then use that to come up with content, and then maybe use AI to make the copy better or whatever. But that it's a deep insight that I have seen just works. But come back to the podcast, right? So what should we talk about? And even in this, we can have prepared something, but it's in our conversation that the magic happens, and where it also doesn't. I could have a AI script and just read it up for you, or you can, no, I use my experience and I talk from that, and that real value is where trust is created, because otherwise it just becomes something that you've seen or heard before. But yeah, so I think yeah, and just to say with the colors, it's I completely agree with you. It's misunderstood also that branding is just colors. It's just even that sometimes I feel like I have to explain that, no, it's not just changing, or like it's sometimes simplified, and it's like it's so much more complicated than that, because it is so many valuable that creates trust. That is not. It's also honestly, some of the things I've been also advocating for a long time is that I want to influence how the sales team or the customers talk to the customers, because it can be so different, right? You can find someone who is just not trustworthy, and then even though if they say the same things, I'm actually leaning into now. Can I please educate or maybe support a little bit here on how we approach the customers, because it can ruin the brand actually as well if you have someone who is not representing. The people are the brand and the trust. So there's so many things you can focus on to support that, but it needs to come from the customer first.
So and we've covered so much territory here that I want to ask you to kind of bring it all together. If there was one takeaway for the B2B C-suite executives that are going to be consuming this podcast, if there was one thing that you wanted them to take away from our conversation, what would that be?
Yeah, but I feel like almost we said this so much that is like, be close to the customer. You have to be curious. You have to just be close to the customers. I honestly feel like that is where B2B is marketing are not focusing to all you said, to all what I've said. That is what I hear every time I talk with people. Like they don't have the same either people hired, or that's what 10 years ago, or maybe even more, I learned from other sectors that we probably need a service designer, because thinking like, oh, there was one telling me in a hospital that for example, they have service designers because the beds are bigger than a normal bed. So you need to make sure that you build enough space for the beds. You cannot just put a normal door. And I was like, oh, that is exactly how we need to think. Like when we build flows, when we build everything, we need to think about again what customer journey that will happen, and then build it towards that, and that changes all the time, right? Now I don't know the hospital beds if they are changing, hopefully not, because then you need to rebuild the house always. But how technical we are, 10 years ago, the target audience of my sector is probably different than now, and 10 years from now it's going to be different as well. So I constantly need to rethink my processes, how I build my communication architecture, and so on. And again, I feel like the B2B has been a little bit stuck in this lead B2B sales motion, and then that's just how it's been for so long. Even there's been a little bit product-led growth came a little bit on the side, which is more probably good for the B2B, but otherwise it has been very much that has been driving. And I also feel in that case, marketing, for example, what success looks like, is a little bit behind in the B2B compared to the B2C, because I think for a long time, you've also seen growth is almost a new word, or like, I think a lot of companies understand that a marketing is not just this part of the cake, or what do you call it, in the B2C world. They now understand, okay, there's so much more they need to be involved in, even also in product. Where, yeah, I'll give you a tip. There's been a little bit of product marketing also influence more in the B2B, but it's just, I've just seen, yeah, be close to the customer, build everything from there, and don't hold back on influencing either. You just need to have a voice and dare to speak up.
I have to tell you, I wish we had another 2 hours because this has been fascinating. So maybe there's a series that'll come out of this, but I just wanted to say thank you because the goal here is to bring on C-suite perspectives from all over the world that we've all been steeped in and experienced in and have insights and perspectives on how do we build pipeline? How do we build sustainable growth in our companies? And if we can all share with each other, then I call that the rising tide that lifts all boats. And you were an amazing part of that rising tide today. So I just wanted to say thank you very much for coming on.
But thank you for inviting me. I think what is also nice for me joining these calls, you're also getting into the. I have been stuck a little bit also. Okay, I need to bring leads to, you get, and then you remind yourself, oh, you know what you need to bring to the table. You need to remember that, be the voice of the customer, and remember the business, why we are here, and what, yeah, also build for the long run and so on. So for me, it was also a good reminder to have that perspective. So thank you for that.